Welcome to the 2023 Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA and brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. You're about to learn from teams of some of the top saltwater fishing pros, and how you really glean the most from the Saltwater Sportsman Seminar Series is listen for the little subtleties, the small things that we are doing to put together a great catch or to get a few fish when times are tough out there. So let's get right down to it and start off with the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series.
Coming to you from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, it's the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Get ready, everybody. Here's George Poveromo.
Welcome to the 36th Annual Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA and brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Florida Keys Backcountry is the name of this session. And again, I call them distinguished paddle experts because that's exactly what they are. And one living legend sitting near me, Captain Richard Stanczyk. In fact, he's not a captain, he's just normal Richard Stanczyk of Bud and Mary's fame.
Actually, I've had a captain's license 55 years.
Then we're going to call him Captain Richard Stanczyk of Bud and Mary's fame.
Use that term loosely.
Exactly. And glad to have him here. And Chris Hanson, when it comes to fishing the backcountry of the Upper Keys, Key Largo, he is an absolute terror. We've done shows together. He knows his stuff, and he's a pleasure to fish with. Glad to have you on this panel.
Thank you, George.
And my longtime pal, going many, many moons and many, many tides ago, I've known him that long, the one, the only, Harry Vernon III, who is an offshore guy at heart, but he does a good amount of backcountry, and he has some unorthodox tactics to catch fish that we may get into or we may not get into. But anyway, let's jump right in this. And Richard, if you could give us a quick abbreviated calendar of the backcountry, when do you see, like, when are the tarpon running hardest? When do you see the sea trout show? What about the reds? And so could you give us any kind of a calendar? I know you can get them back there year round, but give us a calendar when they're most abundant.
Oh my gosh, George. You know, can I get a little bit off the track just for
Absolutely.
a second? You know,
you're going to do it anyway.
I am. I've been down there, fishing the backcountry down there about 50 years. And I'll tell you something interesting. Maybe people don't know this, but back about 1947, Harry Truman was president in December, was when they finally established Everglades National Park. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for guys like John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt, who were wise enough to start to set aside public lands, as they did in Yellowstone and various other places, we wouldn't have it. But the backcountry down there is a vast area, and I guess there's about maybe, 800 square miles that you can access right from Isla Mirada. But there's a lot of conditions and things that have changed so dramatically in the 50 years I've been down here. So water quality is such an important thing right now. But when it comes to actually knowing when and where to fish for what fish, and of course, let me try to mention the names of the fish in the backcountry. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've got the snook, the redfish, the black drum, the tarpon, triple tail, trout. I don't use bonefish in that because they stay more in the saltier water over to the front. But each of those fish, have a different time of the year. But and water temperature plays and time of year plays such a big role. I could just go on for the whole half hour. So I think that's what we should do is go to some other people, come back to me, and I'll give you some specifics that I like and little tricks that I like to catch each or all of those types of fish.
You got a deal.
Okay.
Chris, I'm reeling you in, pun intended on this one. Now, why I like Key Largo for the backcountry stuff is because there's so much to do around Key Largo proper. You don't necessarily have to run way, way, way back into the backcountry. You've got a maze of creeks, canals. You have Jewfish Creek itself, which should really, really produce. Give me an idea, if somebody's going to take you out right now, say it's the wintertime, to catch some fish out in the backcountry, what are you looking for? What's going to determine what area that you want to shut down and try? There's so much to read back there for the inexperienced.
In the wintertime, we're mainly looking for wind direction, water temperature.
Give me an example how that relates.
So let's say the water temp's in the 60s.
Yep.
We're going to go and find deeper creeks where the water might be 61, 62, 63 degrees. And that 2 to 3 degree difference will make a big difference on what you're going to catch. And you'll catch your sheep's head, you'll catch your black drum, some redfish, maybe some snapper, Jack Crevalles, and if you're lucky, some snook.
If you wanted to try to get, say, a trophy class snook, over the limit, a wall hanger, where are you going to go?
You're going to find the mullet.
Okay.
You find the mullet, and you'll find the fish.
Okay.
Hands down. You
Even if the
find
mullet
those,
are running shallow?
yes, even if they're running shallow, you find those areas where the wind's blowing those mullet onto the shoreline, and that water is real muddy, there will be big snook in there.
Okay, what are you doing to get a strike at it? Do you have to use live mullet and give them what they want? Is there artificials that work? How do you pull them out of there?
You can, I'm a bait fisherman,
Right.
so I'll either use live mullet or pilchards, or even a pinfish, or I'll use cut bait, like a nice chunk of mullet or ladyfish.
And would you throw right into the school of mullet with that, or
I'm
how
going
would
to
you?
throw, if you're fishing a section of shoreline where the water's real dirty and you've got some overhanging trees, try to skip that bait up underneath the trees.
Okay. What pound test leader and at approximately what size hook?
We're using probably either 40 or 50 pound fluorocarbon, and depending on the size of the bait, anything from a 3 to a 5/0.
So when the mullet are running, you're still getting fish on pinfish, cut pinfish, and other baits as well.
Absolutely.
In there. And they'll still respond to that. They're not necessarily keyed on the mullet.
Right, because a lot of times, they may injure a bait fish,
Yeah.
and they just want easy pickings.
Gotcha. We're going to take a commercial break. Then I'm going to come back, whether it's a good idea or bad, to Harry Vernon, and we're going to talk about some of his tactics for catching snook and redfish in the Florida Keys backcountry. We'll be right back after this short commercial break.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Simrad. Go with Simrad and go with confidence. Penn, let the battle begin. Ross, comprehensive oceanographic analysis for fishing. Mercury Outboards, go boldly. Engel, portable fridge freezers and high-performance coolers. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
Welcome back to the Florida Keys backcountry session of the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Going to Harry Vernon now, Florida Keys backcountry, and you're pretty darn good with snook. You do okay with the redfish. And then you got a little tricks of the trade there for these gag grouper that get in these creeks and into the backcountry. Now, what can Harry Vernon tell us about fishing the backcountry of the Florida Keys?
Well, what I like to do, I kind of do things a little, I would say, the lazy way.
No.
And
do
yeah,
you?
pretty
Oh,
much.
Okay.
Well, I like taking my wife or inshore fishing because she gets seasick offshore, and she loves the backcountry. And so we'll sit there, and it's going to sound crazy, but I'll take something like this little X-Wrap, this little Rapala right here, and I will literally just up and down those little channels, back in the backcountry, back through those little areas, and we just troll these little guys. And I will catch more snook, redfish, trout, mackerel. I've gag groupers, and of course, there's very few of those around, those Jewfish, Goliath groupers. I've caught everything on these little guys.
Now, what are you doing as far as leader, the terminal rig, to fish that, and what pound test tackle?
I'm using super light leader. I'm using 25-pound fluorocarbon, which is a hard mono, so it holds up pretty good. And my line is 12-pound test line.
Tackle?
Spinning tackle, down to 8-pound. And I'll put 2 or 3 of these behind the boat. And
now, are you fishing them in the upright holders, or are you holding the rod tip by the water to get more depth? What's the subtlety
I
here?
like holding the rod in my hand. She just puts it in the rod holder, and she's got her cocktail, and she's happy. So that's how she fishes and all that. But I like just going along, and I like to try to, if I'm fishing the mangroves, and go right, just get as close as I possibly can. And if I feel that little tap or whatever, then I'll jig it a little bit, and it'll get hit again. Now, what I do also, like say I get a snook, I'll go back around just like we used to fish kingfish offshore and go round and around and keep catching because they're in an area. And you'll catch 2, 3, 4 snook just going around like that. And we're not using bait, no shrimp, no pinfish or anything like that. And it's just super, super productive.
I have done this before too, is trolling the Rapala CD18s based on the depth of a channel,
right,
or the 15s, and trolling the intercoastal waterway, a place like Jewfish Creek. The gag grouper show up in the wintertime,
Big
and
time.
you would see these channels with all the traffic, and you wouldn't think that nothing would be in there, but you troll those plugs, and you get some beautiful grouper. I've done that in North Key Largo with the gags, and then plus tarpon will eat those things, and in big snook too.
Yeah, I've caught so many fish on. If it's a deeper water, you're going to use the CD18s, which is the deeper running. The 18 mags are your shallow. It's got the plastic lip. It's a shallow runner. So if you're fishing, say, probably, I'd say 5 feet to 8 feet, I like to use in the 18 mags because it's a shallow running. But again, the gags, if you get a gag grouper, go back around, and they're structured fish. They're going to stay around whatever area. It could be the reef bottom. It could be anything. Around those bridges, Long Key Bridge and all those areas, oh, just crushed them there so many times.
And I'll give one subtlety.
Really
I'm going to come back into Richard to talk about some of his tactics for the larger snook. Is the subtleties of when you're trolling those plugs, it's almost a two-person deal. One person to watch that depth sounder, and especially if you're trolling a channel, and the other person to work the rod, keep the rod tip down near the water, keep the trajectory of that plug.
Yep, you want to get as close to the bottom as you can.
Reel up a couple times. You want to keep it near the bottom. And the person who's watching the fish finder, hey, you're coming up on the rise, you bring your rod up so you can skip and then bring it right back down. So it's not just putting the rod back there and trolling.
Right.
It's a finesse fishing too to get them. And when you do hook up, don't stop. Keep going, because that grouper's going to try to dig you into some structure there.
Right back to the structure, especially if it's a little wreck.
I see you and Islamorada with these incredible catches of snook. Now, after all the storms and all that, and I would have to assume there's a lot of debris that might be scattered there too, do you tend to find these bigger snook tied in on mangroves in your channels, or do you tend to see these on any kind of scattered debris that you might be able to locate out there?
Well, first of all, let me straighten you out on one thing.
Okay.
You know, when I have 2 boys. I spent my whole life taking them and their friends fishing, and now my boy takes me fishing.
Yeah, I noticed that.
You know, when you see me with those fish, you know, those are fish my son put me on.
Right.
And you referred to me as a legend. You know how I became a legend?
How's that?
Holding fish that other people caught, taking pictures, right? But, you know, you're right. After Irma, there was, you know, a lot of debris that came off. I do almost all of our fishing off what we call the Cape, and even to the west of there. And my son is an electronic wizard. And we do catch a lot of big snook. And the big snook we catch a lot of time on submerged trees and what have you in a little deeper water.
And I'm going to hold you on that submerged tree, because we're going to have to go to submerged commercial break. But we're going to come back. We're going to float this session. We're going to come right back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series. Florida Keys Backcountry coming right back at you.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Rapala, your best shot at a world record. Suffix, always use the best line. VNC, your expert in hooks. Williamson Lures for the pelagic playground. Starbright, blending technology with performance since 1973. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
We are back to the Florida Keys Backcountry session, the Saltwater Sportsman Seminar Series presented by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats and filmed on location at the IGFA. I'm talking with Richard Stanczyk, and you're talking about some of the debris that one may find in the backcountry. How does that relate to snook, and how would you pull the snook off of that?
Well, Chinook, it's interesting. From my perspective, you know, with the high water, we fish shorelines. And the water drops out, we fish the creeks and the runoffs. You know, the most consistent bait back there sometimes might just be a big live shrimp. Something interesting, right now we're experiencing, as you know, an extreme cold front.
Right.
You know, fish will react totally different in this ice cold water. One of the keys in this cold water, if you take your shrimp and let it lay still on the bottom, you're going to have a chance of catching fish in this frosted water. For big snook, my favorite bait, because it's easiest for me to get, is still a pinfish. A pilcher, obviously, also is one of the best baits back there. Pilchers are a lot harder to keep alive, a lot harder to catch, and what have you, but pinfish are very hardy. So one of the other things to remember with snook, they got gill plates. They're very sharp, and I do use 40 to 50-pound mono leader on them, because they'll go through it.
Chris, you have a rig here, and I've seen you fish this a bunch. This is when you go to rigs. Talk about that. What pound test leader, hook size, and what are you fishing for with that, and what are subtleties in working that rig?
We use this for a lot of different things.
And hold it up straight there for the camera too.
We will fish sea trout with these. We will catch redfish on them, and we will catch snook on them and tarpon.
And I see at the bottom, the business end, it's just a little jig head. What is that? What,
That's
how many
about
ounces?
1/8 of an ounce.
Okay.
And depending on the depth of the water and there's current, you may change that to 1/4 or 3/8. Depends on where you want it to be in the water column. But we'll fish this rig up against the mangrove trees. We'll put either a live shrimp on it or a pilchard or a strip bait of mullet or ladyfish, and it produces quite well.
When you're in there, do you let the current carry that, or you try to hold it steady? Do you pop that at all? What? tell me
Depending on the
subtleties.
areas that I'm fishing, sometimes I'll let it just drift down the mangrove line. And if I'm fishing in open water, then I'll give it a little pop, and it'll make that little clanking sound, and I believe that mimics a shrimp in distress. But it seems to work real well.
Gotcha. And that's tarpon on that too.
Yeah, you can actually put a heavier leader on this, maybe 50, 60, 80 pound, and put a circle hook and a live crab on it and drift it out behind the boat.
Gotcha. And what are some of the subtleties involved in catching in the creeks? What's the quickest way to action?
Quickest way to action, chum with live bait. Get them fired up. You get them fired up, and then you throw a nice lively in there where they're popping, and then you just get a hookup.
Interesting. And how is the fishery in the Jewfish Creek itself these days?
I think there's some water quality issues around that area, and it's not been as good as it should be.
Gotcha, because that was a pathway for a lot of good fish, gag groupers, some big snook had come
there's
out from
still
under that
fish
bridge
there.
too. But yeah.
It's not nearly as good as it used to
Gotcha.
be.
We're going to take a short commercial break, and we're going to come back and deal with backcountry fishing in the Florida Keys. You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA. We'll be right back.
The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series is brought to you by Atlas Tracks, satellite tracking of recreational pleasure boats, supply vessels, and fishing fleets. Columbia Sportswear, stay cool and protected while fishing. JL Audio, ahead of the curve. ACR, building survival products since 1956. Florida Keys and Key West, visit flakeys.com. George will be right back. Welcome back to the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series from the IGFA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Let's get right back to George.
You're watching the Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series, filmed on location at the IGFA and brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Mako Boats. Florida Keys Backcountry is the session. And I'm steering back over to you, Richard. You look at the backcountry, and you see a lot of triple tail get caught from back in there too. And do you intentionally target them, or they just tend to pop up around some of maybe that bottom structure that's there? If somebody wanted to go back and go after triple tail and bring home a nice, tasty dinner, where would you direct them? What would you look for?
I happen to enjoy fishing for triple tail. I've been doing it for about 40 years. It's not as easy as it used to
No.
be. But the most interesting thing that I enjoy now, and there's a lot of boats doing it, that area that runs from the Cape all the way up into Flamingo, a lot of people think triple tail only go around buoys, which they do, but you'll find the smaller ones usually on the buoys. But there are free-floating triple tail that'll come on the grass bottom, maybe a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles off the beach sometimes. And if you're slow and if you got good eyesight and you're watching because the water's dirty back there, you'll just see these big things. They'll all be a white glow. Of course, they'll just about eat anything. And live shrimp's probably best. A pilcher works. Chunk of mullet will work. The key to it is cast a little past them. Don't hit them on the head, and then just kind of move it slowly.
So catching the mangroves back there, what's the fastest way for action?
It amazes me the number of mangroves. We'll get into this. Obviously, I think we're going to talk about mackerel eventually one of these years, but we'll get to that. But if you go out in a deeper water, all these potholes are filled with mangrove snappers. And that whole area to the west of 9 Mile out in there, that's kind of like a nursery, if you will, or a breeding ground for all these things. But they also all move into around all the islands and all the moats and what have you. There are some tricks.
Well, what time frame is this now? Where
they
they're the most
bite, they bite
all year round?
Oh, yeah, except
Okay.
when it's freezing. And they're not going to bite. But one of the tricks to catching the mangrove that you want to eat, sometimes there's hundreds of these fish. You're throwing a shrimp in there, and the big one will never get to it. So sometimes we'll take a chunk of bait or a little bigger bait like a pilcher, and you will capture your bigger mangrove by doing that.
And then, Chris, anything you want to add, maybe in the way of redfish? Are they different habitat than where you're finding the snook, or are they mixed in there?
No, I want to say the snook and the redfish are pretty much hanging out in the same places.
You same rig, or you change your tactics
No,
for
you,
reds?
you can fish the same rig, and a lot of times we get clients that come and they're like, "Hey, we just want to go catch redfish." Well, yeah, I want to catch redfish too, but you're going to catch some snooks and some jack and maybe a trout, but all those fish are going to be in those same areas.
Any time of the year where the reds might be a little bit more abundant, or are they year-round consistent?
They
or what?
will, for me, fishing out of my bay boat, you'll catch a lot more redfish in the fall and the winter than you will in the other months, because they tend to congregate together when the water gets a little cooler.
Understood on that. And the same basic rig's going to make it happen on there
or
too.
we can fish. We fish a heavy jig head on the bottom with either a shrimp or a pilchard.
Very good. I want to thank our distinguished panel, Captain Richard Stanczyk, Captain Chris Hanson, and Harry Vernon III for that session. And we'll be coming back with another Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series topic shortly. Thank you. There you have it. The Saltwater Sportsman National Seminar Series will be right back next week with a totally different episode. If you want a chance to win our Super Grand Prize Mako 17 Pro Skiff Center console, powered by Mercury Outboard, enter the drawing at nationalseminarseries.com. One lucky winner will take home this beautiful Mako boat. Best of luck.